Welcome all the graduates and their family and friends. We're delighted to have you here. We've imagined doing this under very different circumstances, but we're pleased to be able to do it online. We're sorry we can't do this at Giannini Hall. We all love Giannini Hall. We have such fond memories of the beautiful place. And what we're particularly unhappy about is that we can't hood you. As I was saying before, that's one of the high points of the celebration. We're in a gigantic auditorium. We put a hood over your head. I told you my little story about Dave Sunday.
How you doing?
And I wanted to ask you guys if you would Photoshop pictures of yourself in your robes.
Worship ceremony.
And I just want to point out that most of you are one of our favorite classes ever, not just because you're very good students, because we just sat around and laughed an awful lot. Of course, you have abominable tastes in sweaters, but that's another story. All of you are graduating on time or faster than on time, for which we're very proud of you. The other three of you who are not in this class, who are in other fun classes, you guys are really setting speed records. And Leo, of course, is setting the modern day speed record, although his class was difficult because they insisted on being fed chocolate if they were going to sit through class. But that's, again, another story. And I just want to tell you how very, very, very proud we are of you. Our people have gone on to do wonderful things, particularly all of our graduates going back to John Kenneth Galbraith, Philip Habib. Not all of them were academics. Many of them went on to work in government and nonprofits. Philip Habib, as I mentioned, was the great negotiator. And we're sure that all of you will join this rank of doing wonderful things with your lives. I do want to stress, however, that we really, really, really would like you to stay in touch with us. As soon as it's possible to visit, please come and visit us. We know that this is disappointing how you left. We didn't get to say goodbye properly. We'd like to do that in the future, but we also want to hear about all the wonderful things that you do with your life. Before I go any further, I just want to thank Sophia for organizing this event and all other fun events at the ARE. Without Sophia and Carmen, we just wouldn't be the fun place that I think this is. And without further ado, I just want to start turning this over to our faculty to tell you about what wonderful people our graduates are for the families and friends.
So this is actually my first year of hooding students. I joined Berkeley in 2014, and Vaishnavi, Manaswani, and Saqib were the first set of students that I am officially hooding. So this is you know, an important moment for me as well. So I'll talk first about Vaishnavi. So Vaishnavi came to Berkeley from the LSE and the World Bank. And you know, like me, she shares. She's a fan of Salman Rushdie. We met at one of his readings in San Francisco as well. So what I wanted to do was maybe spend a little bit of time talking about her dissertation and just how impressive it is. And so why don't I start with that? So you know, one of the things that is being talked about a lot in India, in particular during this time of COVID and coronavirus, is sort of how to get credit to the poorest, especially in rural areas. And informal credit, you know, continues to sort of dominate the forms of credit that rural households have access to. However, most of the government policies are really geared towards formal credit and how to ensure that banks and cooperatives and other kind of formal lending institutions are able to increase their lending, especially during this time. And the interaction between the two is basically completely unstudied. And so that's where Vaishnavi's thesis comes in. She spends a lot of time actually establishing a relationship between the formal and the informal sector the credit market. And that's something we really don't understand. And that's, very, very understudied. And I think is going to be hugely important going forward. So, Vaishnavi basically wrote the first paper that documents a significant interaction between the formal and the informal credit sector. And what she shows is really interesting. She finds that informal credit, which is the lion's share of credit, as I just said, is basically much better able to handle demand in a context where formal credit is also present. So that's kind of the first piece of evidence we really have, that there is a strong relationship between the two, and sort of a greater supply of formal credit actually increases the ability of informal credit to function as well. So I think this is super interesting work. And I look forward to seeing more of her work, as she continues to work on these and related topics with a postdoc at Berkeley next year. Congratulations, Vaishnavi.
Great. Yeah, so I'm very pleased to talk today about Deepak. Like all the faculty, I'm sure, I apologize that we can't have an actual hooding, but hopefully we'll be able to do something maybe later on in person. So with Deepak, let me just briefly sort of describe my experiences with him, and then I'll talk about his research. So, one thing that I think has stood out to me from the beginning with Deepak is really his passion, I would say. So I still actually remember meeting him on graduate admit day over 6 years ago, back in like 2014. Most of these meetings, frankly, are somewhat pedestrian. Students come in, they answer questions about the program, we give them a sales pitch and so forth. They generally are not like super memorable, although of course we always hope that the students, that we convert students and they come. But Deepak came into my office and started talking about how essentially he rode through the countryside of Tanzania on a motorbike using like a GPS unit to map out resource constraints faced by rural farmers as an undergraduate. And essentially I just came away from the meeting thinking like, wow, this guy is like really intense. And after he came to, so fortunately he came to the program and started his coursework. His passion, I think, shifted somewhat to domestic issues, but it really hasn't dulled in any way. So as I'll describe in a moment, he got interested in essentially like police use of force issues and Black Lives Matter when he was second year. And then he made that his second year paper and then just kept on pushing it forward and forward. And it advanced and eventually became his dissertation. And so we've talked about that, paper and the draft. It's gone through many iterations, many times, and we've had like a lot of conversations, essentially about sort of toning down the enthusiasm and the emotion in the paper to make it, frankly, kind of drier and more academic. Which, to be clear, was kind of frustrating at the time when it was going on. But in retrospect, I really don't think that his research would have progressed like it did without that drive. And I can also really see it in like how he approaches other facets of life. He actually got a pretty attractive like postdoc offer about a year or so ago that he ended up passing up because it would have taken him out of Northern California, and he really wanted to be proximate to his partner. And I have to say, as his advisor, as his academic advisor, I didn't have like great feelings about that as was going on, because the academic market, as we all know, it's tough and it's thin. And the chance of finding a research position that you'd like in this particular area is generally low at best. But he just kept pursuing what he wanted, and ultimately he landed this job at PPIC, the Public Policy Institute of California, that I really expect is going to be a great fit for him. And I know he's super happy he has it, and I'm really happy that he got it. Now, in terms of his research, so as I mentioned earlier, what he does is he looks, his paper is really looking at essentially how coverage of high-profile police shootings affects officer effort downstream, so like in the sort of quarters and years after the shooting. So this really sort of came out of this infamous police shooting in Ferguson, Missouri, after which there were a bunch of newspaper articles that sort of like anecdotally said that officers were essentially reducing effort or enforcement in response to the possibility of sort of like heightened scrutiny. And there, I think this is kind of I guess I would view this one incident as kind of a catalyst, but this is kind of just a longer running trend in terms of with modern technology and social media and so forth. It's just much more possible to have kind of firsthand documentation of something like an incident like that, and so sort of sooner or later this was bound to really happen. So Deepak was kind of interested, he read all these articles, he was really wondering, is there something systematic there? Like, is there an actual reduction in effort occurring in response to this heightened scrutiny and that we see today? And so he collected data, of course, it's an empirical paper. So collected data on essentially use of force incidents across the entire country and then identified them as being high profile based on news coverage metrics, so whether or not they had generated more than 1,000 articles. And then confirmed that the incidents correlate with Black Lives Matter protest activity, so that it does seem as if he's really picking up these high-profile incidents, and then merges it with police jurisdiction data to create a city-by-month panel data set for the entire U.S. Over like a decade. And so then he estimates an event study design that traces out how arrests change in the quarters following a high-profile shooting, and he finds what I think is some like really interesting heterogeneity by arrest type. So violent crime arrests, so these are things like homicide and aggravated assault, those arrests are unaffected. They don't seem to change at all, as we might hope. These are very serious crimes, and we hope that they would be investigated and ideally cleared, kind of regardless of what else is going on. Property crime arrests, which are less serious, this is things like burglary and theft, some things that don't actually involve violence, they seem to drop somewhat, and then arrests for really minor crimes, so things like disorderly conduct or marijuana possession, those drop the most. And so these findings kind of suggest that there is an effort, but that there's an effect on effort, but that the effect is sort of differentially, or officers are differentially scaling back effort based on sort of the seriousness of the crime. And so Deepak essentially builds or sort of looks or interprets these findings through the lens of a model that specifies the officer's objective function, which depends on like salary and promotions and effort and community cooperation. And crucially, since effort imposes a convex cost in this model, and additional scrutiny increases this cost, then the comparative statics imply that officers should reduce effort in making arrests at the lowest marginal benefit or return for officers, which is exactly what Deepak finds. So I think this was a really nice paper in the sense that it tackled a clearly policy relevant question that was already sort of generating a lot of interest in the media, but did so in a very systematic and credible way that hadn't been done before. So just in conclusion, Deepak, I'm very proud of you. The department is proud of you, and we wish you the best of luck going forward. And certainly, feel free to come back and touch base and tell us how you're doing.
Hi, everybody. Can you hear me okay?
I get it.
I'm going to assume the answer is yes.
Yeah.
So I'm really excited to be able to talk about Claire today. Claire is one of those students that Jeff mentioned that's finishing early. She was, in fact, not supposed to finish this year. And I was actually supposed to have a year off from writing reference letters. And she went and ruined that by getting famous people on Twitter so excited about her research that she had no choice but to go and get a job. So that's why she's finishing early. She's been working since she came to Berkeley and building off of what I think is a really exciting sort of new literature in development economics and the economics of development economics and psychology and economics, which is built around the idea that the experience of being poor leads you to make decisions that are worse in some contexts because of the various stresses you're faced with related to finances. Claire's paper on this is really exciting, and it's really new because it's, among other things, the first one in this literature, I think, to show that these decisions that the poor make when they're under financial stress or when financial triggers sort of lead to this mentality are in fact meaningful and worse in a way that may affect them, may affect their lives and careers materially. And in particular, she's looking at the experience of students on exam questions. I should mention Claire had a lot of experience teaching before Berkeley, and I had the pleasure of teaching with her last semester, and she's an excellent teacher, and I think that is part of what brought her to the set of questions as well. So what she started thinking about was when we give students assessments, a lot of the times the way we assess the way people know math and understand math is with questions about money, especially for young kids. It's about how many quarters you need to buy 3 apples versus 6 apples, or how much change you get after you bought those 6 apples and traded them for 2 bananas or whatever. So her big idea, which turned out to be true, was that these types of questions may act as triggers to sort of bring about financial salience to the poor, and poor kids might do a lot worse on these types of questions than wealthier kids do for reasons that have nothing to do with their competence or ability. And so she does that. She built an incredible set of 3 different data sets, one from an exam sort of administered globally, one from the high school entrance exam in Mexico, and one from an online platform that allows her to submit and control her own homework assignments. It shows that in all of these, the poor do much worse than the rich on questions where money is salient. But not only do the poor do worse than the rich on those questions, that effect lingers. So they also do worse on the next question after being faced with one of these questions that makes them think about money. It starts at very early ages for the children of less educated parents, and continues on through the data that she has into high school. She's able to show that a lot of poor Mexican kids might have gotten into better high schools if they'd been administered an exam that had fewer questions that were triggering this particular psychological effect. So I think this is really exciting. I'm not surprised that famous people on Twitter got really excited about it. It's the first of many very creative things that Claire is working on this intersection of how economics interacts with psychology in a way that may materially impact people's lives. I think it's really exciting. As I said, I'm not surprised that people at Twitter sort of pulled her out of our program, although it would have been great to work with her for another year and not have to write reference letters this year. I'm not surprised at all, and she's got a really exciting job at the end going to the University of Pittsburgh. It's going to be a great tenure track position. I think it's a good fit for her. There's a great group doing experimental economics, behavioral economics, a lot of people to talk to, and I'm really excited for moving forward, and congratulations, Claire. This is great.
Thank you. Woohoo! This is when we all would woo! All right. So,
I'm particularly proud of Elisa and admire her because she's an excellent economist who overcame many challenges to finish her thesis in only 5 years. Elisa arrived with a then toddler Ronaldo, who's just turned 7. As a single mother, she's had to work very hard to take excellent care of her son, teach well, she's a remarkable teacher, and to finish her thesis in a remarkably short period of time. Her primary papers concern market power, the ability of firms to set price above marginal cost properly. Many recent papers, particularly in macroeconomics, argue that much of the changes in our economy are due to greatly increased market power by many firms. In one paper, Elisa examines why many, but not most all, studies find this increasing market power. She hypothesized that these studies produce different results because they use different models, their technical issues involving use of instruments, and the data they use. She used her strong theoretical skills to show the surprising result that 2 of the best known models, which are based on entirely different theories, nevertheless are effectively estimating the same equation, but interpreting the results very differently. She found that the use of instruments has a critical effect on the estimates. But the thing I think was most interesting is she she noted, which seemingly no one had noticed before, is that the change in industry definitions had created two different data sets, and that the two data sets produced different results. So what she was able to show is that the seemingly conflicting results are due to quite a few different issues. And I think this will be an influential paper when she publishes it. She also wrote another paper where, which is the first to estimate double markups in a wide variety of firms. A virtually uncountable number of theoretical papers discuss the double markup, where an upstream firm marks up its price, sets its price above its cost, it sells it to a downstream firm, which then adds another markup. So for example, somebody sets a high price for aluminum. The aluminum is then used in auto manufacturing, and it is marked up a second time. With the exception of a few papers that only looked at one or typically a narrow set of industries, no one has estimated how important double markups are. What she did is she looked at all the manufacturing industries, and she was able to estimate these. She found that the double markups are very, very large. Moreover, she demonstrated that the returns to scale greatly magnify these effects. She also wrote a paper with Dave McLaughlin, Sophia, Tiffany Shea, an ARE graduate, and me, in which she tested the economic theory that more varieties increase demand due to better consumer matching, that is the economic theory, versus a psychological theory that more choice just overwhelms consumers, reducing demand. Again, somewhat surprisingly, she found that both of these effects are important, and both theories appear to be true, despite the fact that they superficially seem to conflict. I have to say this paper was the most fun I've ever had doing research, because she and Dave and Sophia and I just sat around giggling. I mean, thinking deep economic thoughts for a great deal of time. I want to congratulate her again. She and Ronaldo are returning to Chile, where I'm sure she's going to make us very, very proud. Congratulations, Elisa. We're definitely going to miss you, and I hope you're going to come back and visit us as soon as it's possible.
Congratulations, Elisa. La familia puede unmute. Todos.
Mamá, pon la cámara.
Elisa, we love you. We love you.
Gracias.
Elisa, we wait for you. Congratulations. We love you so much.
Yo estoy la abuela y el tata.
Thank you so much, Elisa and Renato. We wait for you.
Oh.
Thank you all. Thank you all. Saqib. And I just wanted to say that Saqib came to us as an innocent first-year student. And this is Saqib in quarantine look. And then I asked him yesterday to send me a photo. And he's like, wait a minute, Sophia, I'll send you a photo after I, drum rolls, shave. So this is the look that he's going to have to take on the world. You have the floor, Praji.
Great, thank you, Sophia. Yes, so Saqib is someone who got his undergrad at Berkeley and then decided he liked Berkeley so much that if Saqib's family, if you are on the link, you can put the video on and Sophia will allow the video to stream. Actually, I don't see Saqib. I think he's here, but
I'm right here, yeah.
Ah, great, perfect.
I actually have my partner here with me, yes.
Oh, excellent. Wow, that's great. I will talk about two of his papers. I just want to say that these are like super exciting papers. I hope he finishes them and publishes them because I think they have the scope to really change our understanding of how development is occurring in Bangladesh. So I'll talk about the first one, which is trying to understand how social norms interact with development. And this is kind of a long-standing question. You know, people have studied this in the context of the Industrial Revolution and throughout the 20th century, which is sort of this idea that, you know, as you see increasing labor force participation by women, as women start to move into employment more, there typically tends to be a correlation with sort of fertility and marriage-making decisions. So this is a question that, as you can imagine, has like lots of problems associated with trying to study it in a quantitative fashion, in part because all of these decisions are so interrelated. It's kind of very hard as an economist to try and figure out what's causing what. So Saqib had this great idea, and he worked with a former student of ours at ARE, who's now at BRAC. And he uses the fact that BRAC runs an enormously successful skills training program for women. These are typically young unmarried women who go through this training program and then find jobs afterwards. And he tried to use this as a way to understand, you know, how is it that fertility and marriage decisions change as a result of employment. And so it turns out that BRAC ran this fairly large-scale randomized control trial where some women were randomly chosen to receive the skills training program. And these women typically went out and got jobs. And so what Saqib and Narayan wanted to do was really try to trace through what happened to the sort of the life cycles of these women and their life histories as they graduated from the BRAC program, went on to get jobs and to start families. And so I have to say that, you know, I was completely surprised by Saqib's findings, and I think to some extent they were as well. You know, our prior going in was that, you know, we thought that this would be consistent with this much larger literature that shows that, you know, movement into the labor force typically leads to a delay in time of first marriage, leads to a delay in fertility. And these effects, at least using the observational data, sometimes are pretty striking. So what Saqib and Narayan find actually is that they really find, even though this training has a big effect on employment, it has no real significant effect on time of marriage or fertility, at least, you know, given the follow-up they've done so far. I hope they continue to follow this cohort through time, because I think this is a super interesting cohort. And even if the findings are null, I think these are kind of the first cleanly identified findings we have of this sort of behavior. And I think this is super interesting because I think, you know, for one thing, it tells us that just purely correlational evidence that people have sort of needs to be you know, maybe investigated more thoroughly. And secondly, it just indicates the importance maybe of social norms and other things that seem to matter a lot more than just thinking about whether, you know, getting a job is going to change these factors. And that, I think, is, you know, that also finds evidence in Saqib's second paper, which is, again, a super nice project, which is, you know, just going to go out in the field. And I think that hopefully once the COVID crisis is over, he can go back to continuing to work on the experimental version of this. And this, again, takes the importance of social norms super seriously and tries to ask how they interact with kind of the modern economic world. And in this particular case, Saqib and co-authors try to understand the extent to which social norms actually constrain economic productivity. And so the fact that there are these strict social norms that govern essentially, you know, who will talk to whom or who you're willing to listen to. So ageism, for example, in South Asia is a big issue, right? So if you're a young worker, and you work at a firm, it's often hard to get older workers to listen to you just because tenure is seen as sort of a big issue. This is true in the US as well. And so what Saqib is trying to find evidence for is basically this idea that social norms restrict the extent to which information should be shared in kind of an efficient model of how the firm works. And in fact shows, you know, they have nice evidence so far from the data that collected that in fact this is a big deal, that in fact there are these norms that kind of constrain firm information sharing within the firm. And this, I think, is, again, one of these things that at some intuitive level, people think must be going on, but there is like very little empirical evidence for this. There's very little, you know, good causal work that shows A, whether it even exists at all, and B, the extent to which it's important. And so the first part, which Saqib has done, is just sort of document that this seems to be first order important. The firms, so to speak, seem to be leaving money on the table because the way in which workers interact is constrained by these norms that are, you know, hard to address using, you know, conventional economic levers. So the second part of the project, which is going to be a randomized experiment that is going to try to tease out the extent to which these social norms matter and the extent to which they can be manipulated or perhaps, you know, altered to some extent, I think is going to be super interesting. So I think both these papers, you know, have this feature that they really take social norms seriously and how these social norms interact with economic incentives. And I think, you know, just like Claire, whose work Jeremy talked about earlier, this sort of expansion of the way economies function to kind of social or cultural norms, I think is something that is going to be increasingly important over time. And I hope Saqib is going to be able to keep working on this. And congratulations, this is, congratulations getting done. It was a long, hard road, but you're done, and then let's keep working on it. Congratulations, Saqib.
Thank you, Aparajit. Thank you very much.
Congrats. A project, don't go anywhere. You want the students all to yourself? Is that it? All right.
If I had all the time, I would, but unfortunately I don't. Yeah, so I am super excited to talk about Manaswini as well. Manaswini came to us also from Berkeley, but also via JPAL, which also meant that she had sort of the mechanics of running RCTs and organizing studies down completely cold. And this is something that I quickly realized when Manaswini and I and co-authors at the World Bank in Chicago were working together on a group of RCTs, and it was completely clear that Manaswini knew way more than us about any of this. And so, our conference calls typically ended up being, Manaswini, what do you think? What should we do, Manaswini? And so, I am glad that, she's graduating, but I do hope we can keep working together because it's, I learned so much from her that I'd like to keep doing that. So she is going off to do a postdoc at UC San Diego. So she will be close to her partner, at least for a while. And I hope that, she continues to work on all this stuff, which I think is interesting. I think she has, like, in some sense, too many things to work on. So I think the one big problem for her is going to be figuring out what she should prioritize. What I'm going to do is talk about, a very small part of her research agenda. I'm not even going to talk about the work that she and I are working on together. I'm not going to talk about the work that she's going to, be doing at UCSD. I'm going to talk about basically her job market paper, which is kind of, again, trying to address a first order question, not just in the context of India, but in general, which is trying to understand how it is that the legal system interacts with the economic system. So sort of how is it that the laws that are framed by a country affect the way in which firms and economic activities organize. And this is something that's, something that's been talked about for a long time by a range of disciplines. Economists have talked about it for ages, sociologists, political scientists, lawyers, right? This is kind of a key issue. And the kind of broad understanding is that there is a relationship between the two, and that, legal systems do affect economic activity, but the extent to which they do so and the extent to which this relationship matters are all sort of questions that are up for debate. And prior to Manaswini's work, we really had some, I would say, by today's standards, fairly unimpressive work that tried to understand this relationship. I mean, it was good for its time, but, Manaswini really revisited this question with kind of the modern set of econometric tools that we have now. And she completely kind of changed the way in which this kind of work is going to be carried on in the future. So the first thing she did, which was, again, something that I had no input at all, she essentially managed to obtain this massive, unique data set that contained all of the cases, in the Indian judicial system for a certain subset of districts, an amazingly rich data set. I think we have, she has only just started to mine it for the kind of questions that are interesting. So she was able to get this data set, but that was only sort of the first step. The second step was to sort of match this data set with firm level data. So she got informations using firm level data, was able to match her case level data set to these firms, and then was able to really try bring all of the modern econometric tools of causal inference to bear on the question of how is it that we can understand the effect of the legal system on firm activity. And the first thing, which is, if you worked on the legal system in India, is you realize that, there's huge amounts of backlog in the legal system. And Manaswini sort of identified the fact that, judge vacancies are something that really drive this backlog. Sort of adding a judge really reduces the backlog. And so she was able to then use essentially the addition of these judges or these judge vacancies to see how much they affected backlog. And the surprising thing to me was just how strong these effects were on firm activity. So the first part of her paper shows the strong relationship between judge vacancies and backlog. The second part of the paper really shows the strong effect between backlog and firm activity. So, but she doesn't stop there. She also kind of finds a mechanism for this. And she shows, in fact, that what really is going on is that there's a much greater increase in lending in districts where these judicial backlogs are eased. And that in turn has an effect on, firm outcomes like profits and productivity. So I think this is amazing work. This is, work that is really setting the standards for how people are going to think about the relationship between legal activity and firm activity now on. With this kind of disaggregated work, I think it's going to be hard to get away with sort of working with more aggregate data sets and sort of less clean identification. And the thing that I think is going to be key, and I think her postdoc has been super helpful for this, is, she has a calculation that basically shows that there's essentially an 8-to-1 cost-benefit ratio of increasing judge occupancy. So, in some sense, the economic policy prescription from Manaswini's thesis really is, fill up judge vacancies. That's one way that you can get economic activity to increase. And that I think is really stunning, just as sort of a way to understand the costs of the backlogs in the legal system. The other thing is, I think, she's going to be working on a postdoc which has a lot of interaction with the state of Telangana. And I'm really hoping that she's going to be able to push this agenda in a very kind of ground roots fashion and try to get the government of Telangana to really take her results seriously and do something about, this stunning backlog, but, actually be able to put numbers on the table. And I think that sometimes more than anything else is crucial in driving policy change. So I'm very optimistic about the effects of this paper, the policy effects of this paper. And congratulations, Manaswini. I will hope to continue interacting with you once you're at UC San Diego. Yeah, congratulations to you and your family.
Thank you so much. No, thank you so much.
All right, congratulations.
Congratulations, Manaswini. Thank you so much, Aprajit. Thank you for facilitating her.
Oh, I didn't do anything. It was all her.
No. Thanks everyone. Okay.
Jeff is already on, and his fan club to come up. And yes, they're all coming. All right, you have the floor, Jeff.
Well, I just want to start off by saying how proud I am of Kwabna, not just as an economist, but as a very good man. You can see by the number of friends he has here that he is very well loved. Kwabna grew up in Ghana and started college at the University of Ghana. And then he came to the United States without any financial support. So to raise money for college, he worked for 4 years. He supported himself while pursuing a degree at Hunter College. He worked night shifts and weekends as a New York City taxi cab driver. He also worked with the immigrant community. The thing that's so interesting about him is not only has he made excellent use of all the economics he's learned, but he's made great use of all of his experiences. In particular, his dissertation builds on his really profound knowledge of the taxi industry, but he's also working on a really fascinating study about how skin color, language acquisition, the acceptance of work experience in your native country affects how well you are matched when you come to this country. Let me turn now to his dissertation. Although he's not the first to examine the role of nudges in behavioral economics, he's the first to provide really credible estimates of customers' beliefs about social norms in tipping, their psychic costs of using a tip, which may deviate from their beliefs about their social norms, and their cognitive costs from computing a non-menu tip. So in other words, you're in a cab, you're thinking about giving a tip, you say to yourself, what's the social norm? What's the usual tip? If I give more or less than that, how's that going to affect me? And if I have to calculate a non-standard number, how do I do that? So what he did is he made use of the fact that taxi cabs in New York City, when you pay by credit card, you get the choice of making a 20% tip or 25% tip, or calculating your own tip. And what he did is he used a non-parametric approach that allowed him to estimate the total decision costs, the psychic and cognitive costs, based on very mild assumptions. But then he added stronger assumptions to let him estimate a structural model. And when he does that, he's the very first to ever be able to identify and measure what these psychic and cognitive costs are, as well as estimate what the social norms are. And he uses this structural model to simulate whether the tipping menu system is optimal, both in terms of the number of options and the options chosen. Now, this sounds kind of narrow since he's doing it for taxi cabs, a dying industry, but this, as you've seen, if you go to restaurants or many, many other areas, tipping is widely used throughout the world. These menus are widely used, but more importantly, what we're learning about how to estimate behavioral economics from his paper is going to be profoundly useful. I believe that this paper is going to be very influential in the behavioral economics literature. He's also written another paper on how the Affordable Care Act affects agricultural workers. Thus, I'm proud to say that at least one of our graduates has worked in agricultural economics. I just want to conclude by saying I respect him, I admire his work, but most of all, I really had a great time interacting with him. We've spent a lot of time laughing, giggling to be frank, and I hope we get to do this in the future. Kwabna is going to be an assistant professor at the Graduate School of Business at Stanford because he's remaining local, albeit down at the farm. I hope we'll see a lot of him and his wonderful new bride, Hanan, in the future. Congratulations, guys. It's wonderful, and you've done great in our program.
Hey guys, please unmute and give Kwabna a big, big.
And to Hanan too. And to Hanan too.
You did it!
Okay,
Let me ask also your parents, godparents, your family, your sister, Piper, everybody to turn on their video. I would love to say hi to them and see their face.
Can you see
hi,
them,
all the family.
Can you see
and
them?
Well,
it's all visible?
Yeah, I see them.
Okay, good.
Okay. Hi, everybody, and welcome to this graduation. I would have loved to have you over here and meet you in person, but these are the circumstances, and this virtual opportunity is a much appreciated second best. So Matt is working out of his time at AOE with a superb achievement on the job market, no less than professor at Brown University, a very prestigious university, and multiple ongoing projects. But I'd like to talk about two especially fascinating pieces of research that I could describe you a little bit. The first, I believe, was started in his first or second year at Berkeley with another students. It is the analysis. Oh, I don't see you, Matt, anymore. Okay, I'd like to talk to you. So this was this is the analysis of the effect of having a parent or sibling incarcerated on a child's long-term human development. And what they found, what Matt and his colleague found, is that contrary to the conventional wisdom, parental incarceration has, listen, beneficial effects on children, which you wouldn't believe. It reduced their own likelihood of incarceration and improved their adult socioeconomic status. This was a truly very ambitious undertaking, Matt, in part because it is a domain with a huge literature and accepted conventional wisdom, which says, to the contrary to what you find, that incarceration has a negative effect on kids. And you two young students were taking on a subject which has been taken on by many far more senior researchers than you were. And we must admire for your courage to doing that. Now, you pointed, and you're right, that most of these other studies were based on very imperfect methods that could not extract the effect of incarceration, as opposed to the many other characteristics of the incarcerated population. And that was the correlation that you demystified. Now, the specificity of Matt's work beyond being extremely brave, so young, has been an incredibly ambitious effort at getting individual data from the population censuses of Ohio and matching them across generations, that means from censuses to other censuses. So that was a huge effort. The paper done, the paper had to confront the most demanding referees in terms of getting absolutely perfect econometrics, because this is in the field of labor economics that has always been at the frontier of econometrics. Well, Matt, congratulations, you made it through, and your paper now, let's tell everybody, is now a revised submit at one of the most prestigious journals. A paper done, I must recall everybody, as a young graduate student. The second piece of paper that I like to talk about, and I want to congratulate you as well for, is your job market paper. So this is a very bold analysis of an incredibly innovative program from the Dominican Republic, where the government allocated contracts to manage construction projects through a series of open call lotteries. And this is a very unusual procurement system for the least, right? And you were quick to jump on the opportunity. As you know well, you were not the only one to be quick on that, but you were faster than the others, right? Now the challenges here were multiple. I mean, there's challenge of economic research, but I want to mention that you had very particular challenge in organizing your research. And notably, it was very difficult to negotiate with all the different institutions in the Dominican Republic to share their data, right? Then the difficulty to getting them to follow through beyond that, and then not to give them instead to other competitors, if I remember well. The results are super interesting, actually. So in a normal context, it's very difficult to separate how much the success of new entrepreneur is due to their own experience as a manager, if they were a manager in some other firm somewhere else, as opposed to their own skills, what really counts. And that's because managerial positions are taken by people who have very appropriate skills. And hence those two factors go hand in hand and are confounded in most of the studies. So here, because of the lottery, Matt was able to separate the role of experience, which was of these people that were selected by the lottery, from the skills they had into getting into the lottery. And what it shows, which is quite important, is that the experience itself obtained by these young engineers through the lottery increase the probability that they create their own firms within 2 or 3 years, if I remember well, by 25%. Now, 25%, let's think twice, increasing creation of enterprise by 25%. This is a very large number when you think of all these other projects and programs and policy which are done everywhere to try to achieve anything remotely from that. More than that, these new firms are not hidden unemployment. They are really they are in fact of higher quality and durability than those created by the other engineers. So for this paper, I would say it has 2 aspects which are really interesting. First, conceptually, I think it's a very interesting paper, and I'm sure it will have a lot of mileage. But also for all of us who are really interested in development, I think it has some very important implication. The results are very important implication in terms of the policy design for promoting entrepreneurship. So congratulations, Matt. This is a truly beautiful pieces. I mean, those 2 pieces are proof of really your creativity. And I can guess if you are going to have a future career that will be far from boring, from my experience. Brown University and its very prestigious economics department was right and quick to recognize it. So congratulations, Professor Matt Pechenko. Let me just finish. Let me just give a sentence of personal note. It has been truly a pleasure to accompany you, Matt, through your journey in our program. As you know it well, it has been very reciprocal relationship where I have sought your advice and learned from you as often as you did from me. And I will miss the security of your help. So congratulations to you, Matt. This is true achievement. Congratulations to the family and to Piper and to your friends who are on here. And we are very proud of counting you among our graduate students.
Please unmute.
Congratulations, Matt. We love you.
Well done, Matthew.
Thank you.
Good job, Matt. Thank you. Dr. Berkower.
Great, thank you. So I think
before you talk, Meredith,
yes.
I can't resist, Susanna. Are you ready? Okay, one. What do you see? Yourself, right? Now what? All right, Meredith, you have the floor.
Okay, great. So I just wanted to say, start by saying congratulations to all the graduates. I'm trying not to look out my window at this beautiful day and think of what it would have been like in Betty and Ellen's garden. But I really wanted to thank Sophia for zooming us all together to mark the occasion. And Catherine Wolfram and I both have the honor of introducing the amazing Susanna Berkower. We both wanted to take the opportunity to sing their praises. Susanna is an exceptionally talented economist and an amazing human. So Susanna, we're so excited to set you off on an exciting career, but we're really gonna miss having you around as a down the hall colleague, so we hope you visit soon and often. So I'm going to say a little about Susanna's impressive job market paper, and Catherine will talk more about all the other amazing things she has going on. But the job market paper sort of illustrates and unpacks a really important puzzle at the intersection of environmental economics or energy economics and development. And to put this puzzle in context for everyone, it's sort of worth noting that virtually all the projected increase in demand for energy is expected to happen in developing and emerging economies. So this is good news in the sense that it suggests that incomes are rising and economic development is happening, but it could be bad news for the climate and for local air quality if we meet that increasing demand with conventional technologies and fossil fuels. So fortunately, there's been pretty encouraging improvements in energy efficiency. So that makes it possible to meet growing demand with less energy inputs. But the key question is going to be, will households and firms adopt these more efficient technologies? And this is the question that Susanna investigates. Susanna designed and implemented a field experiment in Kenya that worked amazingly well. And this is no small feat for a graduate student, and I'll come back to that. Susanna is a true inspiration on many, many levels. But the focus in particular in this paper is on efficient cook stoves. So Susanna starts off by showing that these are really cost-effective investments. So the estimate, the average estimate of fuel savings about $120 per year. The retail price is $40. That seems like a pretty good investment. But in their sample of low-income households in Kenya, Susanna finds that the average household is willing to pay only $12 about. So what's going on? Why do these households seem to undervalue these energy savings, basically locking themselves into higher energy costs for years to come? This is really important to figure out if we're going to accelerate investment in energy efficiency. So Susanna tests two explanations in particular. Maybe households just don't understand the energy efficiency savings, but this really clear research design convincingly shows that improved information really doesn't move the needle. So a second explanation they consider is credit constraints. And in this field experiment, they randomize access to short-term credit, and this significantly increases take-up. So it virtually eliminates underinvestment over the horizon of the loan. So in such a short period of time, I can't really do justice to this piece of work, but it has clear policy implications. It shows that a small subsidy makes a big difference in a really important area of investment. This paper has everything you look for in great research, a beautiful theory model to elucidate the question that they're asking, a really nice research design, well-implemented field experiment. I don't know how they did that, and important and credible findings. So if you read the paper, which I hope you do, Susanna makes this look easy, and it's just not. When you run a randomized control trial, it is very easy for things to run off the rails. And Susanna had many curveballs thrown their way, funding challenges, bumps in the road with the firm that they were partnering with. Susanna gave her the practice job talk on crutches after having been hit by a car on their bicycle. Nothing stops Susanna. So super impressive. I'm a huge fan. It has been such an honor to work and learn from you. Please visit often, and I'll turn it over to Catherine.
Great, thanks. Yeah, let me join Meredith. It's super inspiring to hear all about these students. So congratulations to everyone. I have really enjoyed working with Susanna and hope to going forward. I found 3 adjectives to describe them. They are independent, sensible, and resilient. And I think Meredith touched on these already. So I've worked with Susanna as a research assistant on some joint work in Kenya, and we've spent many days kind of bumping along dirt roads in a matatu to get to our survey sites, and we'd have deep conversations about politics, social issues, that sort of thing. And I can remember a couple of vague mentions of a cook stove company. Had I heard about the company? They asked me if I thought it made sense to look at energy efficiency in a developing country context. And pretty much the next thing I knew, there was this beautiful job market paper with behavioral angles and a model. So as Meredith said, Susanna is an incredibly industrious and independent worker, and I think that'll serve her well. Susanna is also super sensible. So I've found myself relying on their advice for our joint work. We're working together with some engineers to deploy sensors to measure the quality of the electricity grid in Ghana. And one of my favorite results of that work is a 4-minute video that's set to an EDM track that shows Susanna and the engineers in their Airbnb in Ghana, kind of like watching all the lights on the sensors light up at the exact right time. So that's definitely a memory of their graduate career. And finally, on the resilience, Meredith mentioned the bike crash. So Susanna is from the Netherlands, and I think more used to different reactions from drivers than she's met with in the Berkeley area. And this happened in the beginning of the job market year, which is just not great timing. Job markets involve, 27 interviews and trekking up and down stairs, and Susanna had to do that on crutches. So I look forward to following Susanna's career as they progress, and I predict awesome things in the future. Congratulations, Susanna.
Please unmute everybody.
Whoop,
whoop, right?
Congratulations, Sarah.
Bravo.
Gefeliciteerd. Gefeliciteerd.
Dankjewel. Dankjewel.
All right, wonderful. It's my great pleasure to introduce almost Dr. Leopold Biardot. It's a great time of the year. The only advantage I can see of doing this virtually is that none of us have to wear proper pants, which in Betty's backyard we would have to do. This way we can all wear our running shorts and a nice shirt and jacket. So we always say that, coming to this great opportunity. It is more beautiful than anywhere else in the world, and why would you want to live anywhere else? And then you try and recruit graduate students from Tahiti or French Polynesia, and they're like, no, 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 you've got this all wrong. So Leo came to us via Sciences Po. Oh, hello, Kat. Via Sciences Po. He got a master's degree at the public policy school here at Berkeley, which is the top public policy school in the country. So he was, you know, trying to seek a challenge and came to enter our PhD program. And I had the great privilege of meeting him in my first year econometrics class. Leo is just an incredibly kind individual. He has mastered the art of the dual raised eyebrow. Usually when graduate students don't understand something or they take issue with something, they raise one eyebrow. Leo raises both. So he was always the first one I would call on in econometrics because he had the good questions and signaled quite clearly that I wasn't being clear in certain settings. I also really appreciated the fact that when, you know, there was a need for help anywhere in the department, or we celebrated our great friend's Peter Burke's birthday with some chocolate and some cake, and I said, you know, graduate students, come, let's all come together. Leo would always show up to lend a hand or lend some support, you know, emotionally and econometrically when it was needed. So it's a great pleasure to work with humans that are such great people like Leo is. So now let me talk about the stuff we're supposed to be talking about, where the parents all go, yeah, I don't really understand what the faculty are talking about, but we're going to do it anyway. So let me try and translate what Leo's research has done. Leo has two papers that I think are very impressive. One's published, which for a graduate student is quite the achievement. It's in a great general science journal. The other one is still in progress. So there's something called VLMPAs, very large marine protected areas. So these are areas of the open ocean that are 100,000 square kilometers or larger. How big is that? If you live in a country where they do miles for some bizarre reason, we should all go metric, but you know, it's the size of Iceland roughly. So think about protecting or stopping people from fishing in areas of the open ocean the size of Iceland. That's really hard because if you're trying to find boats, you don't really know where they are. And you know, for us from the outside to measure whether people are fishing in those areas once they're protected, or even worse, before the protection goes into effect, do boats jump into these areas, get all the fish while it's still okay to get them, and then run back out? Wasn't quite clear. We didn't know whether that was happening. So Leo took advantage, or is taking advantage of an incredible data opportunity, which is called Global Fish Watch, I believe, where we basically have data on where all fishing vessels above a relatively small size, it's pretty much all fishing vessels are at all points in time via satellite. It's the most incredible data set I've seen. And what Leo is doing, he's checking, do boats actually go in and try and get the fish before the stuff gets declared? And do they continue to fish in these very relatively large open areas? So preliminary results suggest that, you know, that is indeed the case, which of course is worrisome and will require some really, really careful thinking about, you know, A, whether this way of protecting the global fisheries is the right way, and B, you know, are there smarter strategies of enforcing these? You know, examples of more radical enforcement we see in Indonesia, where they, you know, it's a different type of marine protective strategy, but they like sink boats. You know, I'm not advocating for that, but it's a very, very important area of research. The second paper I really like is an area that I actually work in quite a bit, which is this notion that in a warming world, people like their indoors cool. So I see there's lots of people from across the world. I assume if you are, you know, in a warm part of the world, I assume India right now, it's pretty toasty. So if you can, you probably have an air conditioner running. Same thing here in California where it's warm. We have air conditioners running. So the question becomes, as climate change happens and humans become wealthier and air conditioners and electricity possibly become cheaper, who's going to buy air conditioners, right? Right now, the sort of binding constraint is many people in the world can't afford one, but they would buy one if they could because the climate is simply so warm and humid. So they have this nice paper that basically takes data from tens of thousands of weather stations across the world to figure out where, at a very high resolution of data, would you want to buy an air conditioner? And it's quite terrifying where people would like to go buy air conditioners. So if we're thinking that the world is going to cool the indoor environment the way the crazy Americans do, if you've ever been to a supermarket or a movie theater here, you know what I'm talking about. There just isn't enough energy out there to do that. So it just shines a light on the fact that we're going to have to think very carefully about where we cool, when we cool, and how we cool, because the way that Americans do it isn't translatable into the rest of the world. So two really beautiful pieces of research, a wonderful young scholar, and most importantly, frankly, if we're parents, the most important thing is, are you a good person? You're a wonderful person, Leo. I'm very proud and glad to have known you. And can hopefully continue to see you. So my backdrop here is Leo's future place of employment. Leo was one of the graduate students that we always discourage, saying, don't just apply to one job, hope that you're going to get it, and then think you're going to get it. He's like, nah, I'll do it. So he applied to one job, hoped he was going to get it, and got it. So he is moving to the Department of Law, Economics, and Management at the Université de la Polynésie Française, Tahiti, where he will be a professor. This is going to be the view from his office, so we're all very jealous. So now I think we'll unmute ourselves and give Leo a big hand, a big applause. We're very proud of you, Leo.
Bravo.
Bravo!
Congratulations.
Leo, can we have it on record that you're going to invite us all to give a talk in Tahiti now that we're recording this?
On the condition that you collaborate with me on many papers, of course.
That is a deal.
Thank you.
Congratulations. Oh! Lachlan, and Max is gonna take the stage and honor him, but I also want to introduce the future member of the class of 2043. All right, Max, you have the floor.
All right, wonderful. It's my great pleasure to, I don't need to introduce him. Everybody here knows who Dave is, and others in their speeches have already mentioned what a wonderful person Dave is, and what a great pleasure to work with he is. Again, being a graduate student is really hard. You're basically poor. You qualify for subsidized telephone service. You are told every single day that whatever you just did isn't good enough, and you do this for 5 years straight. So it's a really hard job. And in the end, you come out with a piece of paper, and this is the moment we've waited for. So Dave has managed this whole process of being a graduate student, which from my own experience, which is now long ago, I still remember as being one of the more stressful periods in my life, with incredible grace, kindness, and just always lending a helping hand to his friends or incompetent faculty like myself, who couldn't figure out how to program a complicated loop or read a new data set into R or Stata, something like that. So Dave is one of these individuals that you really want in your life. He asks wonderful questions. I'll talk about this in the research part in a second. But he's also just around. He sees when somebody could use a helping hand on something. He's good to students. He's kind to faculty. Has an incredible sense of humor. and was part of a class that I really enjoyed. So, you know, we're all supposed to like our kids equally and each cohort equally, but sometimes there are cohorts that are just really nice groups of people. So to just give you an example of this cohort, if you look at my background here, I'm going to lean out of the way. If you've taken my econometrics class, which Sophia now teaches with Ethan, I always dress because I have no sense of fashion. I'd always wear jeans, a button-down shirt, and a blazer because I don't have to think about what I have to wear. So, you know, grad students sort of dress not well, usually. So towards one of the last lectures, I see simultaneous equations on the board here. So this must have been the second to last lecture or something like that. I walk in and I look at one of the people, I won't name them by name, but who had never really worn an acceptable piece of clothing all year, dressed in a blazer and a button-down shirt and pants. And I was like, what are you doing? And he was like, oh, nothing. I have a job interview. So it took me about 5 to 10 minutes until I figured out that the entire class had dressed up like me. So this is the picture of the class right here. Everybody's in jeans, a button-down shirt, and a blazer. And Dave, of course, because he's the coolest of them all, has sunglasses on and is right in the middle there. So Dave, part of a wonderful cohort of students, and we're sad to see you go, but on the other hand, incredibly excited to see what you're doing next. So let me briefly talk about Dave's research. Dave's got a couple of really cool papers that I really like, and what I fundamentally like about Dave's work is often you get graduate students who see research that somebody famous does, and they say, ooh, I can make a really small marginal improvement on that, you know, piece of work that famous person did. And that's really not what you're supposed to be doing, because the famous person has probably done a pretty good job, and marginal improvements are marginal, right? So Dave really went out there and looked around and tried to think about, you know, the sector of water consumption is a part of the research universe characterized by awful data sets. We just don't know a lot about it because water consumption isn't metered very well or read very well. So the literature, the empirical literature there is relatively scant, let's call it that. So what Dave did is he, with his incredible computational skills, I mean, I've rarely ever seen anything like it in my life, went out and basically scraped data on, you know, what's called water rights and related data sets. So it basically in California determines how much water you get to, you know, pull from surface streams and, you know, other sources of water. So when the state of California curtails water use in a drought, it's not everybody gets hit equally, but junior rights holders get hit first. So in his newest paper right now, he looks at what happens if California curtails the amount of water you get to withdraw to holders of different types of water rights. So what he shows really convincingly in this beautiful data set, and this paper will go much further, but he shows that using a really nice causal identification strategy, that junior rights holders see much more significant decreases in acreage of important crops planted and grown than people with senior rights holders. Some people might say, yeah, I sort of knew that, right? You would expect that. But as we all know, your intuition is often wrong, right? This is why we do science. This is why we measure things. So Dave not only gets to confirm something that we knew was probably true, but also provides a very precise measurement of the effect. In his job market paper, which I just think is a gorgeous piece of work, I just read it again for this thing, deals with this notion of the tragedy of the commons. If there's a resource that's, you know, limited and you don't stop people from using it, people are going to consume too much, right? So water is a very classic example of this. So what Dave did is he put together this incredible data set on two types of policies to manage water in California. One is you assign property rights to water. Basically, you tell people you now own this, and you next door don't, right? And you see whether people who have a right to something are better at managing that resource than people who don't. And compared it to a program where the government manages the resource for you. I'll let you guess once which regime worked better, the government sort of quasi-managing the resource, or you tell people, this is now yours, look out for it. It was the property rights, you won, you picked the right one. So it's beautifully measured. It's not casual science, this is really causal stuff, so little nerdy joke right there, but he shows for property rights, you see a 14% increase in groundwater depth, which is really quite an astonishing finding. Finally, Dave's going to go far in life. Dave's got a wonderful job with the Environmental Defense Fund. There are lots of non-governmental organizations that pretend to do economics. The Environmental Defense Fund has some of the most talented environmental economists on staff and running the place. So think about what students often say when they come to this department. They say, I want to come here, I want to write a PhD, I really want to dive into something, and then I want to make a difference. Well, Dave has chosen an employer and a platform that will allow him to do just that. They are incredibly lucky to have gained one of the most competent, kind, nice, and also funny individuals on their staff that will make them a better organization. Dave and Sarah also now have Agent Sweet Potato on staff right there. They have a beautiful child. So this has been a big year for you, Dave. I'm incredibly proud of you. Nice job, nice dissertation. You're a star. And now, Max out. Oh, we clap. We clap.
Yeah.
Bravo.
Thank you so much, Max. And thank you, everybody that's helped me along the way. Thank you.
Max?
Yeah?
I was laughing so hard when you leaned out that I couldn't get the whole, okay, good. All right, that's the photo. Oh my God, it's the best thing ever. Thank you. All right, can I ask?
Awesome.
Congrats, everybody.
Right.
Oh, Diana's in.
Diana.
Yay.
Diana, yay.
Woohoo, Diana, very nice. I would like to thank Diana. Can we all thank Diana and give a big, big.
Good to see you, Diana. Thanks for everything.
Thank you. Couldn't have done it without you.
Website. Okay, smile. Susanna, look. Oh, good, good. Okay, ready? One.
Hi, Mano.
Bravo.
Thanks,
Go
Carmen.
for
Nice.
Oh, I'm so glad we don't have to go.
Enjoy.
What's up, Manu?
Good night, guys in India. I think it's time for you to sleep.
Yeah. Thank you. Enjoy. Have a campaign.
Nice job.
Hey.
Well,
Thank you, Suhud, also for support. Convey to him. Bye-bye. Bye.
Thank you very much, Sophia.
Where's Claire?